and it'll go back to red. We do have a quorum, so I'm going to go ahead and get the meeting started since it's 6 o'clock. Is that okay with everybody? If we could have Carla call roll, please.
Okay, Chair Dodwell. Councilmember Bertolino.
Here.
Councilmember Bope. Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Edens.
Here.
Councilmember Galani.
Here.
Councilmember McCune.
Here.
Councilmember Nyhan.
Here.
All in attendance except Bope. Councilmember Bope.
Okay, thank you very much, Carla. I guess we need to get forward with the first role of business, and I'm the past chair of this committee, but we need to elect a new chair since we have a new group of individuals. So are there any nominations to put out on the table?
Katie,
Yes, sir.
before we do the nomination for the new members, would it be appropriate to kind of go through what the chair is responsible for and maybe some little background for those who haven't been on the committee before?
Okay, that's a good idea. Very good idea. Thank you, David. For those of you who haven't been on this committee started out as kind of a working group of council prior to hiring Julian to look at how we can engage businesses and increase our ability to garner sales tax. Quite honestly, that's our primary tax source within the city of Wildwood. And so this committee's been charged with the task of working with Julian since we brought him on board to develop methodologies and help direct him in what the council would like to see from the economic development manager specifically, so that we can hopefully get new business into our community. Obviously, with COVID-19, we have had major changes to all sorts of our economy as a whole. So I think we have some daunting challenges going forward. We have to look at our current business models and the businesses that we have on hand and see how successful they are. So as part of our activities during each of these meetings that we try to hold monthly is we talk about specific topics that the council members want to bring forward for ways to engage the community in other ways to learn about the economic components of the city of Wildwood. We also look at ways that we can encourage more businesses to come into the city of Wildwood. And then Julian will review his activities that he's had for the past month. He's put together a great chart that basically defines where he's had contact with people, what kinds of activities have gone on, what new businesses have come in, what old businesses may have left. And we'll have a section of our meeting to be able to ask him questions specifically about the list that he does provide us, so that we make sure that we keep all of the committee informed, and you can keep your constituents informed, and we can also look to see if there's anything that we need to be sharing with the council as a whole to either get their approval or just to keep them updated on some of the activities that are going on. The role of the chairman is basically to sit down with Julian, and I've been doing it. He and I have been doing it via email. He puts together an agenda, throws it my way via email, and then we will converse back and forth via email. That works for us. It doesn't always work for everybody else. And if I've got questions, I can call him, reach him. And so it's been a fairly painless chairmanship. And then your other role as the chairperson is to make sure that you keep the conversations going, that we keep ourselves somewhat on time. We don't want to go beyond the 2 hours, hour and a half to 2 hours allotted, because everybody's time is valuable. Joe Vunich participates with us as the Director of Parks and Planning, because he used to have economic development under his umbrella as well. And we thought as a planning group initially that it would be prudent for us as a community to put some more emphasis on economic development. And Joe's got his hands full with planning and parks. So we are very glad that we were able to find Julian. For those who don't know Julian, he came to us from, I guess I would call it a consulting firm that provided economic development services for communities on a contracting basis to some extent. And so he would work to help communities develop an economic plan, et cetera. So he's very, very organized in his methodology for doing things. So we're very lucky to have gotten him, and he's put together some great relationships with the vendors and the businesses here in town. One of the major problems that we had previously was most of the vendors and businesses here in town didn't feel like they had a voice at all. Nobody really had the time to go out and introduce themselves as a representative of the city of Wildwood. And Julian, I think, has done a fantastic job of making those connections, making the community businesses feel like they do have an impact on Wildwood. And so as part of this committee, I think we all try to take very seriously the fact that by enhancing the capabilities of businesses in Wildwood, while we do not want to have it look like Manchester Road that we see east of here, we need to be looking at ways that we can offset the expenses with some income for the city of Wildwood besides just our tax base. And because our tax base is based on sales tax, we have to look at ways that we can garner businesses to come into the city of Wildwood and primarily focus on the town center corridor. That's the reason the town center was developed, was so that we had a place for businesses to put up either a satellite office or a corporate headquarters. We've had some corporate headquarters in here that have done so well that they've had to grow to bigger locations and found property outside of Wildwood, unfortunately, that was available, buildings that were available. And so as those businesses shift and change, we need to make sure that we as a committee help support Julian and the goals of the city of Wildwood in concert with what the business community would like to see. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I may have gone on a little too long. Does that help? Yes, Crystal.
So a two-part question. So the first one is, I see the objectives and goals, and I think Julian's done a great job. I've seen it from council. So as individual members of the this committee, are we tasked to do certain jobs in the past, or are we outreaching with Julian, or how do we as members of this panel participate, or what kind of things are you looking for us to do?
Well, I think we participate in some of the decision-making process on how to prioritize activities that economic development managers should be focusing on. Number one, we help prioritize. Number two, many of us have participated in activities that have gone on in the city of Wildwood through the Wildwood Business Association, through specific, let's see, I'm trying to think of something. We had a setup over at the West Glen Farms. I'm trying to remember the name of that shopping center over there, but Julian had put together a vendor showcase where different businesses could come in and kind of have a tent and show their stuff. And so several of us participated in that and made sure that we were walking around talking to the business people, asking them what they needed, etc. So that's a lot of what we will be participating in. And then to also bring new ideas for things that your residents may be asking for in Wildwood from a business perspective, or all of us have neighbors, have friends that are either business owners or primary business leaders, and talking with them about what could we do in the city of Wildwood that would entice them to put up roots here so that we can benefit from augmenting our income.
Yeah, I think this is a great opportunity and I'm very honored to be part of it. So I guess my last question to you, Katie, is are you interested in the chair position again?
Lauren and I had talked, and Lauren's very interested in it. So I was going to put her forward because I've been doing it for the last, well, since Julian's been here. So 3-4 years. So
Okay.
I'd be more than happy to let someone else do it.
Okay. Unless anybody else is interested, I will make a motion to elect Lauren as the new chair for this committee.
I'll let somebody else second since I'm the current chair.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Okay, looks like it's Lauren's task now. Yay, Lauren.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I'm excited to still be serving on this committee. Some background for new members. This has always been somewhat informal. This has not been a place where there's been heated arguments. We have not had a tradition of needing to make sure that someone's only speaking twice on a subject. If, however, it would get out of hand, I would certainly enforce those rules. And I will be enforcing the privileges extend to members of this committee that do not extend to members that are not. That being said, to further answer some of your questions, Councilmember McCune, as you get new ideas, if you get them after a committee meeting, please send them to myself and Julian. I am welcome to adding anything on the agenda for discussion. I know I've certainly done that. Katie granted that opportunity to all of us last time. And so we are constantly looking for good and new ideas. With that being said, let's start with a voice vote for approval of the minutes. I imagine there will be enough abstentions that we'll need to do a hand count. First, are there any corrections to the minutes?
I don't have any.
Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Abstain. And I was an aye on that as well. All right, do we have any public comments? I see we have 2 attendees.
If either the 2 public attendees, Councilmember Garitano, or it looks like the name is Helen, if either of you both would like to speak at all during the meeting, please use the raise hand function in your Zoom window. It's under the participants tab. That'll let us know that you're interested in speaking and we can give you power to talk. If not, we'll take a few minutes to let you find that button and we'll move on.
And now is a good time to mention as well, if you want to kind of raise your hand up and I will write down a speaking order list. You can also use the hand raising feature under panelists, and I will try to get everyone in order. I'll give you the head nod to let you know you're on the list.
I do not see any hands raised, so I believe we're good to move forward.
Excellent. Moving on to ready for action. Julian, would you like to present 511?
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate it, Chair. On the agenda, the first item under ready for action is the review of economic development goals and objectives. This is primarily intended for the benefit of the new council members and those individuals new to this committee, to give you a little bit more background on where we are and why we are. Some of the initial planning documents that have been drafted, both with the master plan document with its most recent edition from 2016, as well as the economic development guide that was developed by an outside consultant, Housie Levine, in 2016. And then also the 5-year strategic goals and objectives that are developed by the City Council every 5 years. These 3 strategic planning documents lead this program. Our job as team members is to implement those documents. They were all drafted, designed, and approved by you all as council members. So our job is to try and implement as many of these goals and objectives as possible. The master plan added a new economic development element in 2016 as part of its second amendment 20 years after its initial creation, to create this new chapter guiding economic development within the city. It was mainly a result of a task force that was created in 2013 by the city, as past Chair Dodwell mentioned, made up of a few council members to help steer the city's economic development efforts prior to an official guide being created and prior to any staff coming on board. I've included with the report that was attached to the agenda several items for the committee's use. Since we're all doing this virtual, attaching them to the agenda was about as good as we could do. But for the benefit of new council members, I know there's 4 or 5 of you that are either new to this committee or new to council entirely. We'd be happy to put paper copies, hard copies of these documents in your mailboxes so that you can have a copy of them. I'm sure at the orientation you were given copies of the master plan, but the standalone economic development guide that was created in 2016, we do have bound copies of those here at City Hall as well. And we can put copies of those in your mailboxes so that you can have a nice bound copy to take home and review at your convenience. So each of those 3 documents, the master plan, the economic development guide, and the strategic goals and objectives, each have their own set of priorities, action statements, implementation steps for what we as the city should be undertaking to further economic development for the city. Since each of these documents were created around the same time, there's a lot of consistency between those goals. You'll see in the master plan, the economic development element starts on page 72. There's some long-term goals and short-term goals that were identified in 2013 by the task force. Joe was a very big part of that, so he's much more equipped to handle any questions regarding its formation at that time. But these goals identify assigning a staff coordinator for this purpose, developing marketing components, updating the city's website, coordinating efforts with an economic development consultant, utilizing social media to advance the message of the city, working on capital improvements such as street and sewer and public space additions, important key projects for the city at that time, really to further the city's business community, develop our own local economy, and try to support our business community in any way possible. The master plan has about 7 or 8 pages to that extent within that new element that was added in 2016. As I mentioned, the economic development guide itself was created in 2016 as well by that outside consultant. It was the result of that effort done by the master plan earlier that year, intended to really be a strategic plan for the city. Prior to my coming on board in Wildwood, when I worked for an old consultant agency, we were actually one of the firms that was looking at doing this guide. So I had a pretty good hands-on experience of what it was intended to be. But it is a deep dive into the city's economic development position in St. Louis. Our demographics, our market needs, both supply and demand, as well as different priorities for the city. What are our growth areas? What are our limitations? What are our priorities? Where do we have room to grow? Where are more the restrictions where we might have some challenges? So this guide that I can, as I said, I'd be happy to give you all in hard copy, acts as a blueprint for this program. It identifies a lot of the hurdles that we've overcome as far as what past Chair Dodwell mentioned, the overall identity of the city from the business community, good and bad, but also where there are opportunities for growth and in what capacity. So it's a very good guide for everybody to look into that mirrors a lot of what the master plan goes into, but much more in depth. And a certain attachment within the guide does identify an implementation matrix that identifies both short-term and long-term goals that we've really used to launch this program, largely because before this program was created, there was no economic development staff, there were no economic development projects. So most of what this guide was focused around was starting this program. So it laid out a lot of good groundwork for how we can do that. I'm sorry, Katie, did you have a question?
I just wanted to support what you were just saying in that the organization of each of these documents and how they tie all together, I think will help you not only as a member of this committee, but if you go through these documents and look at how they relate, it will help you with understanding how economic development fits in the overall fabric of the city, and also how it supports the other activities that each of the other key departments like planning and parks and admin and public works, all three are interchangeable, or not interchangeable, intertwined with each other. And I just want to reiterate that if you can go through these documents that Julian has done a great job of pulling together, I think things will start to click a little bit faster for you as you're having some of the discussions in some of your other committees as well. So just to encourage everybody to take a read of those over the next couple of weeks if you can.
Appreciate it. And then the last item that I attached was the 5-year strategic goals and objectives. I believe City Administrator Anselm, who's on our meeting but hiding himself at the moment, had sent this document to all of you all as the new council members. I believe it was in the last week's update, maybe a week or two ago's update. This document, the strategic goals and objectives for 2015 to 2019, was the result of a full day charrette by the City Council in 2015, identifying future goals for the city over that 5-year period. We're in 2020, even though 2020 is the year that seems never happened. We're at that point in time where it's appropriate to start looking at the next snapshot of the next 5 years. We have been using this version, this 2015 to 2019, as a steering point for us as city team members to guide our own programming in absence of a new document. But I know this is a very important piece that will be looked at being updated this year at the earliest, next year at the latest, for the next 5 years. But this really gives you a good insight as to what some of the priorities had been in 2015, which largely created the need for economic development guide, a standalone chapter of the master plan, and a program as it stands today. You know, some of these goals are promoting and facilitating the development of town center, encouraging the development of town center, identifying public funding sources for development, identifying and developing a long-term financial plan. And the entire goal number 1, which is on page 2 of this document, really does a deep dive into how we can promote and facilitate the full development of town center, what types of businesses we should be targeting, supporting additional residential development, mainly to support the city's business community, expanding on infrastructure. This really shows the importance of this program and why the city is taking steps to really help facilitate in the development of certain parts of town center. This document was developed by the past council in 2015. I know for its next 5 years, we'll take a look at this and see what changes are identified to be determined as appropriate. But this is, I think, is important to show the priorities for the city at that point and what we've been using for these past 5 years as a steering point for how this program should really be led. And then I think lastly, outside of those 3 documents, which are very important pieces of this program, I did include in the initial memo, the cover page of that attachment, what the city has assigned itself for goals for 2020. I'm sorry, Councilmember Clark, do you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question on back to the 5-year strategic goals and objectives. How do we measure how much we completed of this? How our success rate of what we had in our previous goals?
I will defer to Sam and Joe for the document as a whole.
Good evening, council members. To answer your question, Councilmember Clark, basically every year we take a look at the progress that we've made. So if you go back the previous 5 budget years, you'll see the updates from each year A lot of the goals that were identified don't have a whole lot of metrics attached to them. So it's kind of hard to measure year over year progress. That's something I'm hoping we can maybe include with the next 5-year set of strategic goals, is something that's a little bit more measurable so that we can begin to track our performance against those goals as time goes on.
One thing that I would encourage is during the reviews of goals and objectives for the city, I would encourage the adding of language by the committee that the Economic Development Committee supports expansion of high-speed internet for resident employees and employers. I think that we've learned, especially during COVID, that this is important to our workforce development and maintenance. I would certainly entertain a motion to that effect. In addition, if you would like, we can go down in order for the discussion so that we're not hopping back and forth on the document. So if we want to start with the first attachment, reviews and goals and objectives, if there's any questions, and then move on to the master plan next. I see Councilmember McCune and Councilmember Bernalino.
Two things. So Lauren, what you're saying for a point of order, you want to take each document, if we have questions, start from the first and take those as we go through. So if I have something on the fourth document, I'm going to wait for my question. Is that what you want?
I would let's maybe prefer it because I'm seeing us ping ponging all the way around, just in order of hand raises. But
okay.
and if
Yeah.
there's nothing, we can go ahead.
So and let me know if I'm out of line so I don't go too far in my question. I guess on the 5-year strategic plan, like what Councilmember Clark was bringing up, and Mr. Vunich can kind of comment on that. On the Park Action Committee plan, we took this large document, the objectives and the goals, and we did red lines to see what we have accomplished or what we've done in the last 5 years. I wonder if that's possible, that we can just see the snapshot from 2015 to 2019 as like a bullet point, like we did in that committee. So I'm just wondering if that might be possible so we can understand what has been met and what's not. Maybe not metrics of did we meet the goal, but did we attempt it, and if we did, what were those bullet point items?
That would be a good idea from my perspective, that we have that for our next meeting. So that we can then start looking at what additions do we want to make to them.
Yeah, and I just don't know if that's possible. So I'd defer to Mr. Vunich. Is that a possible, or Mr. Anselm, to maybe get that together? I know it might be a big task if you don't have it.
So it should, I'm going to pull up the budget and share the screen. Like I said, with the budget that was adopted this fiscal year, it has the update from the previous 5 years, whether it's a red line version or not. Probably not, but I think it gets us close to finding what you're looking for. So you just sit tight for a second.
Yeah, sorry, I'm more of a visual person, so I just want to make sure, and I don't want to put more work on you guys if we don't need to.
And we do have a chart that has yearly status as well, and we're still in the quote mid-year phase.
And to tag on to what Sam said, just because we do add to it each year as part of the budget, I think what he's referencing is each year we do look at the goals and objectives are identified in that document and provide just a yearly update as what types of activities were accomplished relative to those priorities. So we talk about generally the number of businesses that were recruited or retained, the decrease in vacancy rates, the types of special event programming we've created, just as an update as part of the budget for that specific year. So as he's pulling it up, you see each year that update that's been added every year for the last 5 years to show all the different activities that have taken place during that period relative to those goals.
That may answer my questions as we progress forward. So I don't want to put more task on something that's already been created. So thank you for that.
I've got Councilmember Bertolino and then Councilmember Clark.
Teresa, I don't know if you got a good firm answer to your question about goals and hello, where everybody go? I'm sorry.
Okay.
Goals and objectives. Just for what it's worth, when we put this document together all those many years ago, and then the decision was made then that at least for the first 3 to 5 years, the objectives were going to be activities. It was not rational to say we would measure success of this effort against revenue generated in the city or vacancy rates per se and other things. What we had to do was build a relationship, build a program that identified that we want businesses to come into Wildwood Town Center and other places. And we want them to meet our master plan goals. And we want the world to know that we're here, that we are Wildwood and we have a lot to offer. And we want you to come and invest in us. And as part of that, it was, we looked at the fact that, and you probably know, 80% of business growth comes from your existing businesses. And we set a very high standard for outreach to the existing businesses to get them in concert with all the efforts of the city and let them feel like we have a good partnership with them. And I think Julian has done an outstanding job in that area. And we're ready to launch into another good 5 years.
And so Sam is showing that page from the budget where you can see the 2015, 2019 strategic goals and objectives. And underneath that list of objectives, there is a update for each year. So at the end of 15, you'll see the activities that were completed during 2015, and then it goes on to 16 and so on. So you'll see on that screen that Sam has up right in front of you, in October of 2016, my position was created as part of that update to show a status of what was completed during that year. Also, the inclusion of the economic development element of the master plan, the adoption of the guide, the establishment of the standing council committee, and the hiring of this position just for that 1 year. So you can see each year thereafter the different activities that were completed within that calendar year.
Thank you, Councilmember Clark.
That does explain it a lot. I think maybe if we could go one step farther with it, and it might already be developed, but at a glance, have a chart, a scorecard that shows where we're at with the progress in each of these, key process indicators, or you're talking about activity, the key activity indicators, something that shows us where we're at so that we have targets to meet. And when we meet them, we can develop new ones and keep going. It's like the old Franklin planners. Do you remember Franklin planners, when you would categorize everything in urgency and in priority? So urgency is not priority. So if we had a little bit extra there that showed which of these objectives are more urgent or have a higher priority, each one of them, how urgent they are and how where they are on the priority chart, it would help us when we're doing things like budgeting them in, so we know which things are important to, even if they're easy to get rid of, they're important to keep. Does that make any sense?
Councilmember Dodwell. Councilmember Dodwell, did you have your hand up to speak next? You're on mute still. Oh, there you go.
There
All
we
right.
go. Sorry, my mouse was not working appropriately. I would like to make the suggestion that maybe we take these documents, and we're at the end of the 5-year plan. I don't know if we as a council, I know Sam had mentioned possibly gathering the council as a whole together to put together another 5-year plan sometime later this year, and that we, from that, can then identify goals that need to be completed going forward. But prior to that, could we go through and just check off, here's the things that have been completed from this current document? Would that provide any assistance to you, Teresa?
Yes.
It sounds like you're looking for something more detailed than the implementation matrix chart. Is that correct?
Yes, more detail, and with a scorecard, you know, that shows us where we're at. Because as I look at this, you know, just coming in, I don't know where we're at. I don't know how far we've gotten with this. If there was something that's at a glance, I can look at it and say, oh, well, we're almost done with that objective. So I know where we're at. It would just be helpful.
Okay, so let's do this then. Without objection, we'll put this on the agenda for the next meeting. Yeah, okay.
I have two quick points that I think will help out with that. First one being is on the Economic Development Guide document, the bound document that we attached within the agenda. The guide that was developed in 2016 adopted with it as part of its implementation steps, a recommendation to obviously use the guide daily, but also review and update it regularly. Over the last few years in 2017, 18, and 19, each year the committee looked at that document and thought, does this still reflect the changing needs of the community? It's obviously a very important guide, but the city today isn't the same city it was yesterday or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And within the guide itself, there's a chapter towards the end of the guide that identifies implementation steps and says that to reflect the changing needs of the community, the guide is intended to be formally reviewed on an annual basis with an anticipation of a total update in 2021. So within that document itself, we've already identified that next year in 2021, this committee should add to its action list for next year to review and potentially do a complete update of that guide. So most of these requests about objectives and different types of goals and achievements could certainly be incorporated into that discussion to identify. We knew where we were 4 or 5 years ago when this program was being created. Now that we've been doing it for 5 years, how do we look? What do we like? What do we want to change? What should our next 5 years look like? And that's specific for this document, not just the goals and objectives by the city council, but more so for the program as a whole.
Councilmember Clark.
I think that would be wonderful. I think that would be just what needs to be done, is just to look at it like we would do with each one of the projects and go through with what went right and what went wrong. And so if it didn't work, if we didn't get to the target that we were after, and we can go back over and analyze it, well, maybe we won't make that mistake the next time.
All right, with that being said, are there any other questions for Julian or any other staff member as we move down the list on the Economic Development Guide, which we've already been talking about some? Okay, and we've already discussed then a review of goals and objectives, unless someone wants to make a motion right now to add an additional goal or objective to the docket. Then we will move on. Councilmember McCune.
So just for clarification, I thought we were going to postpone it till next meeting so we kind of understand from the new committee members to understand what we need to add. So I was a little unclear when I joined today of what we could or could not do at this point. So
Okay,
can I ask for a continuance for next meeting so now we understand what we can bring to the table?
absolutely. Let's do a voice vote on that. All in favor of postponing additions or removal of strategic goals to the next economic development meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Any abstain? Okay.
One
Oh,
other,
sorry, it was
One-
muted.
Lori. Because we're going to be doing our strategic planning as a whole, I just want to make sure that if we're going to be doing discussions at our next meeting, if we haven't had that strategic goal planning as a council as a whole for the next 5 years, that we work through what we think is important for economic development, but we also keep an open mind as we go into the overall fabric of the entire city organization on how we may be able to, or may need to adjust some of our goals in order to attain goals set by other groups within the city matrix.
Certainly. We work as a system. All right, going back to consideration of new public funding sources. And the other thing that I do want to add is all of the attachments that you have received thus far are what we received last year at the beginning of last council meeting, including this one, except it was updated with the current situation. And I'll open it up for Julian to make comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to add relative to that last item, I think for next month's meeting, by that motion, instead of bringing forward specific changes to the planning documents themselves, knowing that the planned update of the strategic goals and objectives will begin later this year, we plan to look at the economic development guide as a whole next year for a potential update. I think the changes that the committee may intend to bring back next month may just be a reflection of the goals we've assigned ourselves for 2020. So that initial cover page identifies those goals that the program has assigned itself for 2020. Let's look at those, identify within that list what we might like to add. As Chair Edens mentioned, the high-speed internet issue. Councilmember Kuhn, if you have any other items to add to it or remove from it, let's use that working document as a reflection of our goals for this year so that we can allow the 5-year document, the economic development guide, to still be updated on their own as a standalone freestanding document, and we can just make changes to our working goals as we go. Does that make sense?
Yes, we still can have goals internally that we edit without an overall change to council goals. I thought I saw a hand or a page turn. Director Vunich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Also coming up in August is our mid-year budget adjustments. And so when you're looking at your goals and objectives, it's always good to keep in mind that maybe if something rises to the top of the pile, this may be a good opportunity to shift some funding and make it a priority for the rest of the year versus waiting another 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on.
Yep, moving on. And one thing I will add on the consideration of new public funding sources, both Councilmember McCune and myself sit on the Erosion Task Force Committee. There was a mention of the potential for the committee to look at the parks and stormwater task. I can tell you from recent developments, and Director Vunich as well can add something to this, but it is pretty much a foregone conclusion that that is something that the committee supports, and it's going to be a matter of timing for education of the public and when we can essentially put that on the ballot. So as you kind of process that, I just want to express how strongly and likely that that is going to be happening through another committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So kicking off, I provided a report to the committee just identifying some background, which I think is really the main goal of today. And this report is to provide background to the committee. Linking back to part of our previous discussion, one of the goals and objectives for the city council from 2015 to 2019 was developing a long-term financial plan, identifying potential loss of revenues, identifying other potential increases and decreases in revenue, looking at the growth decline in existing taxes and consideration of other funding sources. So this is something that the city has been looking at for quite some time, dating back to at least 2015. And Joe, you probably know longer than that. So this is really intended to give the committee some background on that discussion, give you all some insight as to the city's methods of generating revenue currently, any programs that are available to the city by state statute that we could collectively look at to identify new funding sources. This isn't necessarily intended to generate new revenue to pay for new projects. It might, but it also could be used to offset some current losses in existing revenue from declining sales tax revenues, declines in utility or telephone taxes, looking at ways to maybe offset those losses using other programs that are available to the city by the state. Chair Edens mentioned that the Watershed Erosion Task Force and the Planning and Parks Committee have been actively looking at a parks and stormwater sales tax, which is available to the city up to 0.5%. That's, as she mentioned, already underway. So this would be a discussion either in tandem with that or in addition to that as well. Within the background of the report provided, for you all, especially those that are new to council, the city's primary method of generating revenue is sales tax, and not necessarily sales tax within the city boundary itself, but the city, since its inception in 1995, partakes in the St. Louis County's shared sales tax pool. So our revenue that we receive as a city is a distribution from St. Louis County of sales tax generated throughout the county, distributed back to the city based on our population. So the sales tax generators in the city itself doesn't necessarily reflect the sales tax revenue we receive as a city. Many of the cities incorporated after 1980 participate in the pool. The pool is a moving target. It changes, the formula gets updated, it gets sued, it doesn't get sued. There's certain changes that occur regularly based off that formula, based off cities that like and don't like it. Nonetheless, we are part of it. And we have seen sales tax revenue decline consistently over the past few years across St. Louis County, not in the city of Wildwood, but across St. Louis County, sales tax revenue has declined. Which means less revenue for the city and less revenue to use to pay for basic services in the city. More recently, in the last 2 years, there has been a Supreme Court case, South Dakota versus Wayfair, that ruled that all out-of-state sellers, like the Amazons, shall now collect and remit local sales and use taxes to local government. 48 of the 50 states in the country have adopted their own legislation, taking advantage of that legislation. Missouri is not one of them. So the city of Wildwood does not capture sales tax based off those out-of-state sellers in the same way that other 48 states do in the country in the United States. So that is a downside, a drawback to Missouri not adopting the legislation yet, where we do not see that additional revenue. Separately to that, in addition, after everything that we've said from 2015 through that in 2018, obviously 2020 is what 2020 is. And COVID has definitely made matters worse, forced even more people to shop online, prohibited people from shopping in stores, and made sales tax revenue decline even further. The amount is still under consideration. We won't know how much exactly in decline for hopefully another few months, but nonetheless, it has declined. So this discussion point has definitely occurred over the last few years, looking at declines in revenue, looking for ways that maybe the city can find additional new methods to generate revenue to offset current costs or generate revenue to pay for new costs, where maybe tools can be used to generate revenue within a certain area to pay for improvements to that certain area, which thus frees up revenue from the rest of the city to be used in the rest of the city. Hopefully that makes sense in some capacity. So looking at those three factors, declining revenues, lack of online sales tax, and certainly COVID as a piece of that puzzle, at that point, Chair Dodwell, then Chair Dodwell and us decided it was appropriate to bring this to the committee, just to bring you all up to speed that this is certainly an issue that needs to be discussed, and that there are options that we could look at and are allowed by state statute to look at that could generate additional revenue back to the city. So within that report, I provided a few different options and these are specifically economic development programs. So we do not identify other types of sales taxes or property taxes that are available for other purposes. These programs that I listed on page 2 of the report specifically pertain to economic development programs, projects, types of taxes that can be used for economic development programs, keeping this within our wheelhouse, trying to make it as specific as possible. So there are several different types of tools. These include community improvement districts, neighborhood improvement districts, transportation development districts, special business districts, and each of those are set for a specific boundary. The voters, the property owners within that specific district or for a specific project choose to petition the city to create that district within the city of Wildwood as their own separate subdivision for a specific outlined purpose, list of projects, and request a certain tax to be created to pay for those projects. Separately from that, the city, same way that we have the allowance to impose or ask the voters to impose a parks and stormwater tax, the state of Missouri also allows cities to ask the voters to impose a citywide economic development sales tax to pay for economic development type programs separate from those similar to parks and stormwater. So they're two very different types of tools. Some are more project specific and district related by a specific boundary. And others, like the local option economic development tax, are citywide and are required to be approved by the supermajority or by the majority of voters within the city boundary. Just to give the city some, or the committee some background on how those tools work, CIDs and NIDs are nothing new to the city. The city has a successful community improvement district, the CID. I'm looking outside the window at City Hall and looking at it. It's the Crossing CID. It includes most of the Wildwood Town Center project, including the Walgreens, Benedetto's, PNC Bank, the hotel. That CID was used to pay a bond to construct the public parking garage, the fountain at the roundabout Plaza Drive, the clock tower, much of the Main Street streetscape, to pay for costs and improvements that were necessary for the project to occur, but were above and beyond the scope of what the developer was willing to do for the project. Separately from that, Neighborhood Improvement District, the city in 2004 used a NID to pay for a sewer extension, a sanitary sewer extension from Etherton Road west to include all the property west of Etherton Road to Pond Elementary School, including Pond Elementary, the YMCA, the community college, Westridge Office Center, much of the new residential development on 109 south of Highway 100, to pay for the construction of that sewer by a special assessment on the property owners. So we've used these tools in the past for a specific purpose. The intent of bringing these to the committee today is to look at maybe using these tools for future development or future improvements for infrastructure, street improvements, sewer, parking, and so on. Some factors to concern as part of it to definitely take into account as part of the discussion. As mentioned, the Planning and Parks Committee and the Erosion Task Force are looking at and asking the voters to approve a parks and stormwater sales tax. We have a very low sales tax rate in St. Louis County. Of cities that impose their own sales taxes, we have the lowest of any city in St. Louis County. So that is a very nice advantage for the city, but we also don't want to ask the voters to approve another tax in addition to a parks and stormwater tax. We just need to be cognizant of that. The second factor is that, and not to get too far down the rabbit hole, hopefully this isn't too complex, the Community Improvement District statute allows a community improvement district, a political subdivision of the state, to impose a sales tax, a real property tax, or a special assessment, largely by the voters that make up that district, the property owners or the qualified voters within the boundary of that district. There was a bill passed in the House in May that instead of only requiring a vote to impose a sales tax by the voters of the district within that district, it requires the sales tax to be approved by the entire municipality in which that district is located. So if you were to draw a community improvement district for 20 properties, no longer do you only need the approval of those 20 property owners. Now you need the approval of every registered voter in the city of Wildwood, which definitely makes that program, that statute, much more complicated. That bill is currently under review. It has not been signed yet. There's been many requests to the governor's office for a veto. It will either be vetoed before July 15th or it will go into effect August 28th. But I wanted to at least give the committee that heads up just so you know where that program is going, because it'll certainly impact the city's use of that tool in the future, if and when that amendment is effective. So I included some information with the report in addition to that narrative. Back in 2018, for work we'd completed with the Manchester Road Improvement Committee, I put together kind of a high-level cheat sheet that identifies some of the basics of each of those 5 programs: the CID, NID, TDD, SBD, and the ED sales tax, just to give you some basic information about what they are, what types of funding mechanisms each program allows, how you create each of those tools, and then most importantly, what you can do with the funds generated by each of those programs. Just to give you all an idea of how these tools can be used, whether it's for a specific project, for a specific district, a larger geographic area, or for the local option sales tax for the city as a whole. And then lastly, very recently from this past month from the Municipal League of Metro St. Louis, we included the list of all the local sales taxes that are imposed within every city in St. Louis County to give you all an idea of the current sales tax structure for the city of Wildwood, but also what all of the neighboring cities in St. Louis County are currently taxing, both for their own local sales taxes as well as parks and stormwater, economic development, fire departments, and so on, just to show you our current low sales tax rate and what any additional taxes might do to that structure. As I mentioned, this is just for discussion to give you all some background information. I don't believe Chair Edens, Sam, or myself, or Joe are looking for any specific action or decisions. This is just to give you all some information to consider these tools maybe as an option to generate new revenue in ways that we currently don't. Just as a disclaimer, every one of these tools requires extensive input from property owners, voters, elected officials, residents. None of these can just be created by the city without any involvement from the local community. They're driven by the property owners within the area or driven by the people that are impacted by that potential program. So this is just to get the discussion flowing by this committee to see if it's something that this committee has any appetite for now or in the future. With that, I'll turn it over to Chair Edens for any questions.
Yes, before I've got Councilmember Bertolino and then Councilmember Dodwell on the list, and I wanted to give you an update from a conference I was on with the MML. There are two approaches that they're taking. One is to either encourage the veto of that omnibus bill. The second approach is, if it passes, then to encourage a special session to immediately fix that issue. I'm not sure. It sounds like the MML's first goal will be, in fact, to encourage a veto, and then that is the secondary backup plan. And of course, the MML is also supporting local collection of taxes and at the city level for internet sales. That being said, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Bertolino.
Yeah, I don't want to prolong this, but maybe for the benefit again of our new members, this is like drinking from a fire hose. I know it takes years to really get your NIDs and SIDs all straight, and sometimes you can't. But as a practical, I was just thinking as Julian was talking through these, a very practical thing that this committee wrestled with over the last year, as with the assistance of Joe and with Rick Brown and Public Works, was here's a very practical approach. The R.L. Jones bought the old Pond Inn up on the corner of Pond Road and Old Manchester Road. Teresa, I think it's in your ward, Ward 1. They were unable to develop that property the way they wanted to because they didn't have sufficient sewer. They didn't have any sewer at all. They had to use septic, and they didn't have a capacity to run the septic. So we got to thinking about that whole area from basically the Pond Elementary School out to and past the middle school does not have any sewer. And we were thinking, what would be the opportunities to develop that stretch of road, and including, of course, the Pond Inn, if they had sewers. And that triggered responses. How do you get sewers built? It costs a lot of money. That's when you can form these issues now, these funding issues then come into play about how could we get money available through forming a SID or a NID or whatever we could do with the partnership with the residents along that strip and commercial properties to develop the money to put the sewer line in so that development can occur. So that's in a nutshell, but that's something we struggle with in the very practical approach in using some of these public funding issues that Julian has just laid out for us.
Thank you, Councilmember Bertolino. Councilmember Dodwell.
I was just going to mention that this chart that Julian put together of the different funding sources, I've got that copied up on my iPad so that when we start into discussions on things, I can quickly look at what the description, how the mechanism that's used to work with it. So I just kind of suggest to everybody, stick it on your iPad so that when we get into further discussion on some of the sources for funding, some of the things that we might come up with, that you can take a look at these options. And nobody's going to memorize it except Julian, because that's what he does all day. Sam,
Councilmember
probably too.
McKeon. Oh, sorry. Councilmember McKeon.
Yeah, so for the new members, what I want to explain is I was totally clueless, and I think that the sewer lateral program that Councilmember Bertolino is a great example of how to explain the different funding. I don't know if it was in a committee meeting or at council that Julian did a great presentation to a committee. It was live streamed. You guys can watch that video where he really broke down each and everything. And I think that the bank lady was there too, of how she could financially, you know, if we could do like 3 different buckets of how we could fund this. And she gave her presentation and Julian gave one. I thought that was just the light bulb that went off that really explained each and every option that we have and how it works. So Julian, if you can find that, I don't know where we did that, but it was based on that. And I think that would be helpful for everybody. And it's a good tool that you could be prepared for further discussion. I think reading about it, it doesn't click as well as that presentation. So that was just a recommendation. And the other thing that I wanted to ask, and I'm sorry if I missed it, was the census that's coming, because we're based on population. Do we have some type of gauge of what that's going to look like and how that might increase revenue percentage-wise by chance? I know it's hypothetical, it's not in, but just a question.
I'll kick it to Sam and Joe for some further input, but I know that obviously, as you mentioned, our revenue is based on population, so the census is very important for us. I also know that checking with the census data on 2020 census.gov, you can track the response rates for every city in the country and in our state. And I know that for a fact, the city of Wildwood is 11th right now in the state of Missouri as far as response rates. So our residents are being very responsive to the census, doing very well with responding. I believe our response rate, last time I looked, this was probably 2 days ago, was just over 84% of our residents have responded to the census. So that is a very good sign to show the correct and accurate sampling of our population, which hopefully will help us to show additional residents, which means additional revenue. Sam.
Yeah, and Joe can fill in the blanks as well, but you know, our community development block grant funding, you know, any community that's over 35,000 population receives an automatic allocation from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for money to benefit programs for seniors or low to moderate income areas in cities. So yeah, the population is going to be key, and I wouldn't venture a guess. I don't have a crystal ball to see if we're going to be north of 40,000 or not with the next census. Obviously, we're at 35.5 now. We've had a lot of developments been constructed since in the past decade. So I wouldn't venture a guess, and Joe might want to put himself out there if he cares to, but I see him shaking his head. He's a smart man, so that's why he's the director of planning. So I can tell you, typically, data is going to be collected throughout 2020 and probably a little bit into 2021 as well. Typically, the actual release of the numbers can lag, by several months, if not up to a year. So, so we won't know, a good idea until probably 2021 sometime what our numbers will be. But then, yeah, that builds into our programs automatic funding. So, as Julian mentioned, with regard to the pool sales tax collection, if nothing else changes except for our city's population, we're going to see an increase in potential collections from sales taxes simply because we have more residents.
And I would add on top of what Sam said, just because Joe and his departments did such a phenomenal job with the master plan, there are 2 pages in the master plan on pages 26 and 27 that talk about projected population. So you can see based off current population at that time, what was the census data in 2010 and what was the most recent number in 2015. But you can also see from 2016 to 2020 what the city had projected the population to be each year thereafter. So using that data, in 2020, the city identified a projected population between 37,000 and 38,000. And that's using the amount of new residential proposed in the city at that time and just using popular trends of how populations may increase over time. And just because it's in this next paragraph immediately thereafter, The charter of the city of Wildwood does mandate that if the city's population exceeds 40,000 people, the city will add a 9th ward and 2 more council members. If the new council members weren't aware of that provision in the charter. But I think that was it.
And I will also add too that some of the studies that, well, the study that we paid for that was included as an attachment, we will have the ability to update those numbers as census data comes in, BLS data changes, and we can pull new statistics from the MSA, and we will be able to contract out for regression analysis. So I hope what you get from these attachments is that this committee is more than just a wishy-washy place to make feel-good connections with our business community. That's part of it, but there's a real science to this, and we will be asked to make decisions that affect the long-term viability of businesses in our community. And our economic development manager has served on many boards and commissions and just got a new appointment with the state of Missouri. So we have someone very qualified as a manager, and I would like to reiterate that this is a silo and a sector that requires an education to work in it, and we have that here. So are there any further questions on this topic? Director Bunich.
As representatives of your wards, if you get an opportunity to talk to any of your constituents and they haven't completed the census form, please ask them to. It is critical to the viability of our city. Thank you.
And it's easy to do online.
I will send everybody, based off Councilmember Kuhn's request, a link to the video from, it was the Administration Public Works Committee, summarizing the use of the NID tool for a sewer extension, just with a link to that video that we have on our website so you all can review it. But if you all have any other questions or would like us to do any additional research, just let us know.
Okay, seeing no other hands, moving on to for information, 2 items, starting with the Economic Development Manager's report.
Thank you, Chair Edens. So as mentioned by past Chair Dodwell in her introduction, this is that monthly snapshot that we give you as an insight of what we do on a daily basis, kind of behind the scenes. Most of the new business activity of the city, visitation meetings, expansions, recruitment, doesn't necessarily show up in front of council. Doesn't necessarily require input or approvals by council level. So we began putting these reports together shortly after I started at the end of 2016 to give this committee a better idea of what we do more so behind the scenes on a daily basis. It identifies what is on that month's meeting agenda, identifies what existing businesses are doing to expand, relocate, host special events, identifies most of the new business activity of who is opened or who is in the midst of opening or newly constructing. It lists the new business or the business visitation meetings we conducted over that past time period with our local business community, upcoming or current events that we've attended, whether it's through the WBA, the chamber, more national or regional organizations with either the state or other private entities, and then other updates that don't necessarily fit into those categories. At the request of the committee, we included a separate column that links that individual activity back to a specific action in the Economic Development Guide, just to show that we're not just doing these items because we feel like it, but also because the activities we're completing were something we were told to do by the document that was adopted by the city for this program. Each month when this document is provided, it is for information only, but when there's time and if the committee's amenable to it, usually we like to give just a brief recap of some of the highlights just for you all. The document is public, it's posted on the agenda, but just for the benefit of the committee, I'm always happy to go through any of the more notable highlights if the committee is open to it.
Any questions for Julian? Councilmember Dodwell.
Julian, can you perhaps go over, I know that our friend that we worked so hard to get set up over behind the post office has closed her business. Was there anything, was it just the coronavirus and the fact that everybody just had to stay home that caused the closure, or?
It was COVID, 100%. No doubt about it. We've been working with Andy Miller at the Miller House for, I'd say probably since mid-May to early June, well before any announcements or decisions were made to try and find ways around this.
Mhm.
As we know, she began the process with us probably around October of 2017 to open, going through the city's processes for zoning approvals and build out of her space at that location at 2612 East for the better part of a year. I mean, going through those steps, especially the build out and permitting, which just took a lot longer than expected because of the work that was required. She didn't actually open for business until January of 2019.
Mhm.
So just over a year ago. And so she had a good first year. Obviously, being a small business, word of mouth was key. Local marketing, being involved in local business community for her was huge. She was a model of small business for Wildwood. I think she was an institution for a lot of people. I think she was really what we would like to see out of small business for Wildwood. And I know we all visited her very, very frequently and loved having her be a part of the community. At the end of last year, she was feeling good. She had a really, really good January and February. Really, really good. That actually far exceeded her expectations of how well she could do in January, February, and felt really good about the future. And then March hit. And nobody was prepared or expected March to hit the way it did. And when the forced shutdown occurred and she was required to close her doors, it was devastating. All through and up to when she was allowed to reopen for curbside. But for her sake, curbside wasn't a sustainable business model. And she did not want to be a convenient curbside coffee pickup drive-by. And I think for her sake, after speaking with her, she was concerned about future spikes, the negative psyche of people to visit indoor spaces again, the unknown of a new normal or what that new normal might be. Obviously, the financial side of it was a huge part of her decision making. Two pieces that were pretty key. Last year, St. Louis County reassessed all property in St. Louis County and skyrocketed assessed values for commercial and residential real estate, almost by a third, almost at 33%. So much to the point that her real property tax bill went up about $24,000 last year. So she was paying almost, $1,100, actually more than that, each month towards real property tax. That was a lot to be paying in addition to what she was paying beforehand, especially without any revenue coming in the door. The other side of it is that trying to be creative, knowing that she is a partner for the city, a huge advocate for the Wildwood business community, we attempted to offer her a partnership where she could help us offer certain programming through city grants. As Sam mentioned, we receive funds from St. Louis County for Community Development Block Grant. We were hoping we could partner with her to offer some programming where we offer her grant funds we receive from the county, from the US government, but via St. Louis County, to offer programming by the city at the Miller House with her as a partner. And just for her sake, the numbers didn't work out. And we were working with her tirelessly for a long period of time, trying to find every way we could to keep her open. And at a certain point, she just made peace with her decision. And I know she's been working to sell off all her inventory in the last couple of days. It's unfortunate. She's not going anywhere. Andy Miller lives in town. She lives off Radcliffe Place in Wildwood. And I know for a fact she's currently looking at a new job, a new position in Wildwood with a local business. So she's not going anywhere. The work that she put into that facility at 2612 East was hugely appreciated. I spoke with an individual this afternoon that is currently looking at taking it over. So I don't anticipate the space to be available for long. The second tier location behind the post office was never too conducive for a retail-based business. So I think the opportunity for a more office-based business is hopefully much more profitable at that location. So I know the individual I talked to today was more of an office user. Hopefully that is a good fit for them. It's another local Wildwood resident that's looking at it. It is a very sad topic, knowing how much work everybody put into that business supporting her over the last few years. But as we said, nobody could have predicted COVID, and there's just nothing we could do there.
Thank you very much, Julian, for all of the work and effort that you did do with her specifically. And hopefully we'll get to see her come into another business here in Wildwood and continue to work with us. Any other businesses that are just hanging on by a nail or that have closed that you're aware of?
The only recent one that's been kind of newsworthy, and we're still working with it. You probably either saw on social media or heard in the community right now that there's a business at the Deerbergs Plaza that is expanding. Right next door to Massage Envy, Town Center Dental, Dr. Copeland is proposing to expand his dental practice to double his square footage from 1,600 square feet to 3,200 square feet. And they've been negotiating the lease for, it feels like almost the last year to get it to the point where it is today. But the space that he would be expanding to is the Papa Murphy's Pizza location. And for the better part of the last year, we've been working, and the landlord and the broker have been working to negotiate to move Papa Murphy's from their current location into the old Twist Froyo frozen yogurt location a few doors down that's still available. But in order to pay for the build out costs of building the brand new kitchen and storefront, Deerbergs was only offering Papa Murphy's a 10-year lease. And for Papa Murphy's sake, 10 years was just too long. And so I've been working with Teresa, the business owner at Papa Murphy's recently, since the decision has been made to try and find her another place to go. She doesn't want to close. She wants to be in business, not for 10 years, but if I could help her find a new location within close walking distance to the Deerbergs Plaza for 3 or 5 years, I think should be a lot more accommodating. And so we're trying to work to help support Dr. Copeland at Town Center Dental and with Deerbergs, but also now to help Papa Murphy's find a new place to go, because I think they're a big part of the community. We want to make sure not to lose them.
And then lastly, I just want to ask the new members to the committee, how beneficial are these kind of conversations that Julian has just shared with us to you as you work within your communities and on this committee? I'm just curious whether you find them helpful or not. I do, but I don't want to monopolize the evening.
Councilmember McCune and then Councilmember Clark. Did I see Councilmember Jelani raise his hand? No.
I was just agreeing with Councilmember Dodwell.
Councilmember McCune.
I think it's a great point, Councilmember Dodwell. This is very helpful, and I think Julian's always been good to update us. But I think that as council members and representatives of different wards, we all have different businesses or needs. So I continuously get questioned about the old Jack in the Box in Ward 7. So are we getting a new fast food? Or are we not? So I think that, you know, and understanding the Ships Plaza and what's going on in there, as council members were asked, what are we going to promote? What do we support? What do we not? So this fast food restaurant is kind of a hot button, like some want it and some don't. So I think that this is very beneficial, and I think the input, so I can go right to the source of the residents' updates, I think is helpful instead of me going, call Julian. So I love to see what's going on around town, and I like the fact that I did not know this, that you work with the local businesses like the Miller House. I think really trying to help her really stands out as Wildwood as a community that I find just heartwarming, even though it didn't result in a great positive outcome. I like to see that us in this committee with Julian is there to lend a hand to troubling businesses. So for that work, Julian, thank you. And I really appreciate everything this committee has done as well.
Thank you.
Councilmember Clark.
Well, I think Councilmember McCune said a lot of what I was going to say about Julian, that just hearing these things makes me happy to be here and happy to be a part of this team, because we're working together to help our city. We truly are. And what you've done is commendable. And as a new member, this is just almost priceless, this information that you're giving us, because we don't even know how to form our opinions yet about what's going on without knowing details and history. And with you, with Councilmember Edens and different people, I mean, the whole group has given me so much information, background, so that I can get up to speed. And I still got miles to go, but without that, new members coming in, there's just so much to learn, especially now with this COVID, that I know I appreciate it so very much.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Councilmember Clark. Anyone else with questions over the economic manager's report? Seeing none, let's move on to activities during COVID.
Thank you, Chair Edens. Last item is a report that we had provided about a month and a half ago to the former City Council. This was towards the end of the shutdown. City Hall had been closed to the public for the better part of 2 months, and most of our staff was all working from home. And we were tirelessly working every day to try and address and accommodate the COVID concerns. We crafted a COVID dream team made up of several city team members here at City Hall to respond in the best way, posting content on social media, updating our website, especially for our purpose in this committee, trying to help our business owners in any way possible. We wanted to be an advocate and a partner to them, to support them and identify resources that could help them during this time. Trying to be the best handholder and identify important updates from the state of Missouri or from St. Louis County, different changes addressed by the Public Health Department, or also different funding sources. That was a huge one that is still changing every day. Funding sources that were made available by St. Louis County, by the Regional Economic Development Partnership, and by the Small Business Administration at the SBA and the Treasury. Helping break down those tools to make them a little bit more easy to understand for our business community, knowing that most of them are struggling financially during this time, to provide certain resources and information to them that can help them financially survive this crisis. So we put this report together largely to give the council at that time a little bit of a better insight of all the work that we had been doing during 2019. Because most of the new business recruitment, leads, tenant involvement kind of froze during that time period, there was a lot of other work that we were doing in the background to help our small business community. And so we provided this report to the full council in May 2020, just to give that group a better idea of the work that we were doing. But since there are several new council members and on this committee, several new committee members, we wanted to provide this report to you all as well to show you just the work that the city had taken on during that time period.
Thank you. And I will go ahead and tell you, especially given the new numbers that are coming in and the uncertainty, the next meeting will be online as well for this committee. Any questions, comments, concerns about this attachment? Okay, moving on for not ready for action. I did verify with Mrs. Patrick in the chat feature. I realized earlier that I jumped the gun and did not get a second to Council Members McCune's motion to postpone discussion on the reviews of strategic goals to the next committee meeting. Procedurally, we didn't have to do it. The only reason I did is because those documents were under for action and they were not under just for information. So I would still like it to be a formal motion. I don't think need a motion to reconsider, and Mr. Anselm can correct me if I'm wrong, because the motion does not stand. So what I'd like to do right now, if it's okay, is Councilmember McCune, if you're willing to make a motion again, let's get a second. And this, I apologize for running my first meeting, but let's go ahead and do a roll call vote.
So I make the motion.
Okay, thank you. Seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. Roll call vote, please.
Just a second. Okay. Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Chair Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
and Councilmember Nyhan.
Yes.
Unanimous vote.
Thank you very much for your patience. It really didn't have to occur, but anything where we can get written direction from the committee, I would prefer. There are no items ready for action, including other business news and updates. You can expect on the next agenda a discussion of rescheduling the Lawn and Garden Summit that was canceled due to COVID, and the potential of making that an online experience as opposed to in person as we look at new numbers coming in. Julian, do you have any other updates?
I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll take a motion to adjourn then. Councilmember Bertolino, seconded by Councilmember McCune, non-debatable. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Oh, was that an opposed or a late?
Sorry, my Zoom keeps freezing. My internet's going in and out, so I'm a little bit behind. Sorry.
That's okay. So any opposed? Any abstain? Meeting adjourned. Thank you and welcome to the meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Guys,
Thank you.
good crew.